Hamburg, West Germany, November 1989. The silence in the apartment was never truly silent. To Hans, now 79 years old, the silence was a canvas upon which his memory painted sound. It was past midnight, and a cold rain was lashing against the window pane. The rhythmic tapping of the water against the glass should have been soothing, a lullaby for a weary soul. But to Hans, it sounded like the ticking of a cooling engine. It sounded like the drip of condensation from a steel bulkhead. It sounded like the North Sea. He sat in his leather armchair, his body still, but his eyes moving rapidly beneath paper-thin eyelids. He was awake, yet he was dreaming. The memory came, as it always did, not as a picture, but as a vibration. It started in the soles of his feet, the deep, sub-bass shudder of a destroyer's deck plates at 30 knots. Then it moved to his chest, the pressure of the freezing wind. And finally the sound that stopped his heart. A low, throbbing drone. It wasn't smooth like a modern jet. It was mechanical, guttural, and uneven. The twin Jumo engines of a Heinkel 111 were never perfectly synchronized. They created a harmonic beat, a wah-wah-wah that vibrated in the teeth of anyone standing below. Hans reached for the glass of schnapps on the table. His hand shook, a tremor he had carried since that night. They ask me who the enemy was, he whispered to the dark room. They want me to say the British. They want a villain. He took a sip, the alcohol burning a familiar path down his throat. But the British were miles away, sleeping in their bunks. The enemy wasn't a nation. The enemy was a silence. It was a map that hadn't been updated. He closed his eyes, and the warmth of the apartment evaporated. The smell of old books was replaced by the stinging, metallic scent of ozone and freezing salt spray. He was 19 again, and the sky was about to betray him. February 22nd, 1940, 1900 hours. The Dogger Bank, North Sea. The North Sea in winter is not a body of water. It is a hostile organism. It does not merely exist. It actively seeks to consume anything that dares to trespass upon its surface. On this night, the ocean was a churning abyss of slate gray and obsidian black. The waves were 15 feet high, rolling mountains of water that crashed against the steel hulls of the first destroyer flotilla with the force of battering rams. 6 ships, the pride of the Kriegsmarine. They cut through the darkness in a precise line-ahead formation, a spear thrust towards the heart of the British fishing grounds. At the head of the column rode the flagship, Z1 Leberecht Maass. Following in her wake, like loyal wolves, were the Z3 Max Schultz, Z4 Richard Beitzen, and 3 others. On the bridge of the Leberecht Maass, the atmosphere was one of electric confidence. Inside the dimly lit control room, bathed in the crimson glow of battle lamps, Commodore Fritz Berger stood over the chart table. He was a man of geometry and discipline, his face carved from the same stoic granite as the cliffs of his homeland. He watched the compass repeater, his body swaying unconsciously with the violent rolling of the ship. Course steady at 300, the helmsman reported, his voice cutting through the constant background roar of the ventilation and the sea. Maintain speed at 25 knots, Berger ordered, his voice calm. We are entering the operational zone. Eyes open for the trawlers. If it floats, we sink it. The mission was Operation Wikinger. Intelligence had reported that British fishing vessels were acting as eyes for the Royal Navy. They were spies, disguised as fishermen. The order was simple: sweep, destroy, and vanish. Hans stood on the starboard signal platform, wrapped in layers of wool and leather that did little to stop the biting wind. His job was to watch the dark. Beside him stood Gunther, a boy from Munich who had never seen the sea until he joined the Navy. Gunther was shivering. His binoculars pressed so hard against his eyes they left red rings. "My feet," Gunther muttered, his teeth chattering in a staccato rhythm. "I can't feel my toes, Hans. They're gone." "Stop complaining," Hans shouted over the wind, leaning against the railing to steady himself against the roll. "Think of the prize money. Think of the tonnage pennants we'll fly when we get back." "I don't want money," Gunther replied, wiping freezing spray from his cheek. "I want a stove. I want to be anywhere but here." Hans laughed. It was the laugh of a young man who believes himself immortal. He looked up at the sky. The cloud cover was breaking apart, torn to shreds by the high-altitude winds. Patches of moonlight spilled down onto the black water, illuminating the white crests of the waves.
Look up there!
"Look at that moon," Hans said.
You ever seen
"It's lighting the way for us." He didn't know it then, but the moon was not their ally. The moon was a spotlight, and high above them, in the freezing upper atmosphere, the audience had arrived. 1910 hours. Altitude, 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet above the heaving ocean. The world was a different kind of cold. It was a sterile, thin cold that seeped through the aluminum skin of the aircraft. In the cockpit of a Heinkel 111 bomber from Kampfgeschwader 26, the air smelled of gasoline and recycled oxygen. Oberfeldwebel, Flight Sergeant Jürgens sat at the controls. He was 22, a pilot with the cool, detached confidence of a man who ruled the sky. Jürgens was not a bloodthirsty man. He was a professional. He checked his instruments with the precision of a watchmaker. "Navigator, confirm position," Jürgens said, his voice metallic over the intercom. "Crossing into grid 44, the navigator replied. "Dogger Bank sector." Jürgens tapped the map strapped to his knee. The intelligence briefing earlier that afternoon had been explicit. The officer had tapped the map with a cane, looking Jürgens in the eye. "The Navy is in port. The sea lanes are empty of friendly forces. This is a free-fire zone. Any ship you see in this sector is British." This was the lie that would kill 500 men. The breakdown was bureaucratic. A request for air support had been filed, lost in a stack of papers, or ignored by a commander who believed in strict radio silence. The Navy hadn't told the Air Force they were sailing. The Air Force hadn't told the Navy they were hunting. "Contact," the navigator's voice crackled. 2 o'clock, low. Breaks in the cloud. Jürgens leaned forward, squinting through the plexiglass nose. Below him, the ocean was a vast sheet of ink, but on that ink there were scratches, tiny white phosphorescent wakes stretching out in a line. "I see them," Jürgens said. 6 vessels, line ahead, moving fast to the northwest. "Identification?" "Too dark for flags," Jürgens replied. He banked the heavy bomber, the wing dipping like a pointing finger. "But look at them. Running dark, high speed, formation. Those are destroyers." He felt a surge of adrenaline. Destroyers were high-value targets. "Base, this is 1 AKG. Visual contact. 6 destroyers. Course northwest. Attacking." He didn't wait for a reply. The silence from headquarters was interpreted as consent. "Bomb bay doors open," Jürgens ordered. He felt no hatred. He felt only the satisfaction of a hunter who has found the wolves sleeping. 1913 hours. On the deck of the Leberecht Maass, Hans heard it first. The sound was faint, buried under the crash of the waves, but it grew rapidly. a dissonance in the symphony of the storm. "Aircraft!" Hans yelled, pointing upward. "Starboard quarter!" On the bridge, Commodore Berger heard it too. He didn't flinch. He recognized the sound immediately. "That's a Heinkel," Berger said to his first officer. "Luftwaffe. They must be out here looking for the same trawlers." "They're flying low, sir," the officer noted. "Should we man the flak guns?" Berger shook his head. "No, don't provoke them. Just flash the recognition signal. Let them know we're on the same side." Hans received the order through the voice pipe. "Signal the aircraft. Friendly forces." He felt a rush of relief. It was good to know they weren't alone in this freezing hell. He grabbed the handles of the heavy signal lamp, his stiff fingers fumbling with the shutter mechanism. He aimed the light into the darkness. Clack, clack, clack. The shutters opened and closed. The beam cut the night. Dot dash dot. "See us," Hans whispered, smiling.
"See us."
"We're down here, boys. We're German." In the cockpit, Jurgens saw the flashes. "They're signaling," the gunner called out. "Is that a code?" Jurgens frowned. The flashes were distorted by the sea spray and the angle. His brain, primed to see an enemy, interpreted the data through the lens of conflict. "It's a trick," Jurgens snapped. "British destroyers use dazzle lights to confuse aim. They know we're here. Ignore it." The psychological weight of this moment was immense. Jurgens was not ignoring a friend. In his mind, he was outsmarting a cunning enemy. Steady. Steady. Los! The impact. The first bomb fell. On the deck, Hans's smile vanished. The sound changed from the thrum of an engine to a high-pitched shriek. "Down!" Hans screamed, tackling Gunther to the steel deck. The bomb missed the bridge by 50 meters. It slammed into the water off the starboard bow. Boom! The world turned white. A geyser of water, taller than the mast, erupted from the sea. The shockwave hammered the side of the ship like a giant sledgehammer. The Leberecht Maass lurched violently to port. Hans gasped as the icy water soaked him to the bone. He scrambled to his knees, his ears ringing. "They missed!" Gunther screamed. "They're shooting at us!" "Why?" Hans yelled back, grabbing the railing. "We signaled them!" On the bridge, Commodore Berger was gripping the chart table, his face pale. "He's attacking us," Berger whispered. "The idiot is attacking us." "Fire back," the gunnery officer shouted. "No," Berger roared. "If we fire, we confirm we are hostile. Flash the signal again. Use the searchlight. Show him the flag." Hans was already moving. He swung the massive searchlight around, aiming it straight up. The beam illuminated the underbelly of the Heinkel as it circled back. The black crosses on the wings were clearly visible. "Look at us!" Hans screamed at the sky, tears of frustration freezing on his cheeks. "Read the damn flag!" To Jurgens, the searchlight was just a target designator. "They're lighting themselves up," he muttered. "Fine. If you want to be seen, I'll see you." He lined up his second pass. This time, he didn't miss. The second bomb struck the Leberecht Maass squarely between the bridge and the funnel. It didn't just hit, it eviscerated. The explosion punched through the deck and detonated in the auxiliary machinery spaces. The ship buckled. A fireball of orange and black erupted from the midsection. Steam lines burst, scalding men to death in the darkness of the engine room. The lights died. The pumps failed. The flagship was broken. 1945 hours. The tragedy of the Leberecht Maass was terrible, but it was the panic that followed which turned a mistake into a massacre. The sight of the flagship exploding sent a shockwave of terror through the rest of the flotilla. The captains of the other 5 destroyers watched the pillar of fire, and their minds raced for an explanation. To them, it was inconceivable that the Luftwaffe was responsible. The German military machine did not make mistakes like that. Therefore, there had to be another explanation. Submarine. The word spread over the radio waves like a contagion. Torpedo track starboard. Periscope sighted port beam. Hydrophone contact. In reality, there were no submarines. The British undersea fleet was hundreds of miles away. But fear has the power to conjure monsters from thin air. The formation shattered. The destroyers began to zigzag wildly, engines screaming at flank speed to comb the imaginary torpedo tracks. The coin flip moment. Korvettenkapitän Trampedach, captain of the Z3 Max Schultz, stood on his bridge, sweat freezing on his forehead. He watched the Maass burning in the distance and made a fatal calculation. "Hard to port," he ordered. "Get us away from the ambush zone. Full speed." The Max Schultz heeled over, her propellers churning the water into a frenzy. In his desperate attempt to evade the phantom submarine, Trampedach steered his ship away from the relative safety of the charted channel. He steered her into grid square 55. On the Admiralty charts, grid 55 wasn't just ocean. It was a denial zone, a known British minefield, a graveyard waiting for a tenant. History is still not 100% certain what struck the final blow. Scenario A, the British minefield, waiting silently in the dark. Scenario B, Jurgens, seeing a ship breaking away, dropped a final bomb. Scenario C, a torpedo from a panicked German ship. But the cause matters less than the result. The result was absolute. 1956 hours. Hans, clinging to the railing of the burning Z1, looked out across the water. "Look," he pointed. "The Max Schultz. She's running." Then the horizon vanished. The explosion of the Max Schultz was not like the bomb hit. It was seismic. The destroyer didn't just break, she disintegrated. A massive column of water, mud, and oil shot 300 feet into the air. The shockwave hit Hans seconds later, a physical punch to the chest. There was no time for the crew of the Z3 to launch lifeboats. There was no time to send an SOS. The ship snapped in two. The bow and the stern rose up, touched for a brief second like hands in prayer, and then slid beneath the waves. 308 men, gone, in the time it took to draw a breath. "Max," Hans whispered, his voice cracking. "Max is gone." 2010 hours, the deck of Z1. The Leberecht Maass was finished. The list was 40 degrees. The fires were consuming the superstructure. "Abandon ship! All hands! Abandon ship!" Hans stood at the rail. The water below was black, coated with a thick, shimmering layer of bunker oil. It looked toxic. It looked like death. To jump was to die. The water was 4 degrees Celsius. Hypothermia would kill them in 20 minutes. To stay was to burn. Hans looked at Gunther. The boy was huddled against a capstan, sobbing, paralyzed by the freeze response. "Gunther," Hans said, his voice urgent. "We have to go."
It's cold.
Gunther shook his head, his eyes wide and vacant. "It's cold, Hans. I can't feel my legs. I can't move." Hans grabbed him by the coat. He looked into his friend's eyes and saw the truth. Gunther wasn't coming. The fear had severed the connection between his brain and his body. "I'm sorry," Hans whispered. The signature moment, slow motion. Hans vaults over the rail. Gravity takes him. The sound of the fire fades, replaced by the rush of wind. He sees the hull of his ship looming above him, a wall of dying steel. He sees the rivets. He sees the rust. The surface of the water rushes up. He anticipates the cold. Impact. He hit the black slime. The cold was not gradual. It was a sledgehammer blow to the entire body. It punched the air out of his lungs and clamped a vice around his chest. For a moment, his heart stopped. His brain went white. The shock was absolute. He thrashed in the water, kicking blindly. The oil was thick, clogging his nose and mouth. He surfaced, gasping for air, but inhaling a mixture of freezing spray and fumes. "Gunther!" he screamed. There was no answer, just the roar of the fire. The POV shift, the cold eye. High above the inferno, Jurgens banked his Heinkel to get a final look at his handiwork. He looked down at the burning wreck of the Z-1 as it began its final slide into the deep. He didn't see Hans struggling in the oil. He didn't hear the screams of the dying men. From 2,000 feet, there was no blood, no pain, just geometry. Jurgens checked his wristwatch. He noted the time in his logbook with a steady hand. Target eliminated. 2012. He felt a cold, professional satisfaction settling in his chest. "Good hunting," he whispered to himself. Then he turned his plane toward Germany, leaving the survivors to the mercy of the freezing dark. 21:30 hours. Luftwaffe Base, Germany. Jurgens landed the Heinkel smoothly. The tires screeched on the tarmac. He taxied to the hangar, feeling the warm glow of a successful mission. He climbed out of the cockpit, pulling off his flight helmet. He walked into the operations room, expecting schnapps, expecting a handshake.
Boom.
"Two ships," Jurgens announced, grinning.
Boom.
Direct hits, massive secondary explosions. They went up like fireworks. The room was silent. The squadron commander stood by the window, his back turned. The radio operator was sitting at his desk, head in his hands. The air in the room was heavier than the air in the cockpit. "Sir?" Jurgens asked. "Mission accomplished. 2 destroyers sunk in Grid 44. The commander turned around. His face was gray, drained of blood. He held a piece of paper, a teletype from Naval Command. "Jurgens," the commander said, his voice hollow. "We just received a signal from the Admiralty." Jurgens felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Sir?" "There were no British ships in Grid 44 tonight," the commander said. He walked over and placed the paper on the desk. "The only ships in that sector were the first destroyer flotilla." Jurgens stared at the paper. The words swam before his eyes. Z1 Leberecht Maass sunk. Z3 Max Schultz sunk. Friendly fire suspected. The room seemed to tilt. Jurgens looked at his hands. He was still wearing his flight gloves. They felt dirty. He remembered the flashes of light. The British trick. ... German. He realized then that he hadn't outsmarted the enemy. He had killed his brothers. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just stood there, the blood draining from his face, as the weight of 578 ghosts settled onto his shoulders. 22:30 hours. The rescue. The rescue came too late for most. The destroyer Z4 Richard Bateson, having realized the submarine threat was a phantom, returned to the scene. The searchlights swept the water. To the men on the Z4, the sea looked like a macabre soup. Bodies floated in life jackets, heads slumped forward, bobbing gently in the swell. Hans was clinging to a wooden crate. He was numb. He couldn't feel his legs. He couldn't feel his hands. The only thing he felt was a strange, seductive warmth spreading through his chest. The final stage of hypothermia before death.
Wake up.
Don't sleep, he whispered to himself. If you sleep, you drown. He heard singing. It was faint, ghostly. A group of survivors on a nearby raft were singing Deutschland über alles. Their voices were cracked, off-key, trembling. They were singing to stay awake. They were singing to prove they were still alive. One by one, the voices dropped out. The song faded into the wind. When the Z4 pulled alongside, Hans was hauled up the side like a dead fish. He collapsed on the steel deck, shivering violently. A sailor wrapped a blanket around him. "The submarine?" the sailor asked, looking terrified. "Did you see the submarine?" Hans looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with oil. "No," Hans rasped. "No submarine." "Then who?" Hans looked at the moon. "Us," he whispered. "It was us." Hamburg, 1989. The inquiry had been swift and secret. Hitler ordered the incident buried. It was labeled a tragic navigational error. The survivors were sworn to secrecy. The widows were sent letters claiming their husbands had died for the fatherland, with no details given. Hans survived the war. He survived the Atlantic convoys, the Channel dashes, and the final collapse of the Reich. He married. He had children. He grew old in a city rebuilt from ashes, but he never went back to the sea. In his apartment, the old man opened his eyes. The match he had struck to light his pipe had burned down to his fingertips, stinging him. He didn't flinch. The pain was a reminder that he was still here. He picked up a photograph from the side table. It was black and white, grainy. It showed the crew of the Z1 on a sunny day in port. Gunther was there, in the back, smiling, unaware that the ocean was waiting for him. Hans touched the face in the photo. "I'm sorry, Gunther," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't hold on." He wondered about Jürgens. He wondered if the pilot was alive. Did he also sit in a room, listening to the wind? Did he also wake up sweating when a plane flew overhead? Probably. In war, there are no winners. There are only survivors, and the ghosts they carry. Hans turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. But the ticking of the clock remained. Thrum, 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 like an engine, circling forever in the dark. The sea keeps its secrets. It washes away the blood and the oil, leaving only the water, indifferent, eternal.